Hello, welcome to AQuA and the new accessibility testing criteria. My name is Martin Rickley. I'm the Executive Director of AQuA. Also on the webinar today, later we will hear from Greg Jotham. Greg is AQuA's Chief Quality Auditor. And we'll be hearing also from Sabine Lognig. And Sabine is the Communications and Regulatory Officer for the Mobile Manufacturers Forum. The Mobile Manufacturers Forum is an organisation that has, I think, about a dozen members, but we'll hear more from Sabine later. And we've been working with Sabine and the Mobile Manufacturers Forum on the topic of accessibility, as we will hear later. So, moving rapidly on, you'll hear more from Greg and Sabine in the latter part of the session. So today we have three sections to our webinar. We'll start off, I'll talk a little bit about AQuA and how AQuA can help, and what we generally do, just to give you some background in case you're not familiar with us. Then we'll move on into the introducing the accessibility testing criteria, when we'll be talking to Sabine and finding out where this idea came from and why the MMF and AQuA have come together to actually put together some accessibility testing criteria. And then once we've done that, Greg and I will have a little dive into the detail of the accessibility testing criteria. And if that does pique your interest, then you'll be able to find out more on the AQuA website, which we'll give you the address for later. The accessibility testing criteria, I think, are live on the website now, and so you'll be able to download those and have a look at them after this presentation, if you so choose. Okay, the App Quality Alliance, AQuA. So AQuA is a worldwide not-for-profit trade association. We have members as far afield as the west coast of America and all the way across to Beijing. And I think today we have people dialed in from all over the world. So a worldwide not-for-profit trade association, and we are run principally by our members. And our members include carriers or network operators, device manufacturers, testing companies, developers, and many others, but all within the mobile application industry, and all highlighted by their care, their interest, their concern for the quality of apps, either on their devices or on their networks, or produced by themselves. Our goal is to help the industry further improve the quality of mobile apps to the benefit of everybody across all platforms. And we build on the expertise and experience of our members, of developers, and of the industry in general. So let's have a quick look at what AQuA does specifically for developers. Now, we do a lot of things for network operators, we do a lot of things for testing service companies as well. And by testing service companies, we mean either people who produce test tools, or people who do the testing, or people who are involved in any sort of providing any sort of testing service to the industry. For developers, we do a number of different things. And one of our prime developers that we have is Golden Gecko. Golden Gecko was our first endorsed developer. So you can see one of the things that we do is we endorse developers. And that means that we have looked at the developer, we've looked at their quality assurance processes, we've looked at how they go about developing apps, testing apps, producing them, and the sorts of checks and balances that they have in place to ensure that the product is always a high quality app. Essentially, a very quick quality audit on that developer to determine that they are at least producing to AQuA baseline standards, if not higher. We feature case studies and any quality related news and opinions on the website and in social media, and we get a fair amount of coverage from the press, which is quite nice. It was nice to see that our draft accessibility testing criteria were picked up by one of the trade magazines a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that we have, we'll talk a little bit more about later, is the Quality App Directory, which is a showcase for apps of high quality. And we obviously provide the testing specifications for developers to freely use. We facilitate discussions with other professionals. We've held a number of round tables now where people have talked on subjects as diverse as continuous integration and testing, automated testing, all the way through to privacy and whether the specifications and guidelines are actually useful. And of course, as we involve everybody, we involve the developers in our production of the AQuA deliverables. Whenever we come up with something new, we always go out to our members and ask for feedback, input, and revisions. And of course, we promote developers that we endorse quite strongly as much as we can. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that AQuA produces. One of the basic pieces of information is a best practice document. Now, this gives some guidelines as to some of the things to think about when you first start developing your app, or indeed designing your app. It's essentially matched up with the testing criteria in that it helps you avoid the pitfalls that the testing criteria helps discover in an app that hasn't been written to the best practices. So this is your essential guide to developing high-quality mobile applications, and we have done a lot of work on this over the years, and we've brought in as many complementary guidelines as we can, so we are now fully aligned with advice from AT&T, with advice from the GSMA, and indeed, of course, on the Android side with Google. And it's kind of interesting to see that some of our stuff does look very similar now to Google's, and I'll guarantee we published it first. Let's talk a little bit now, move on to the AQuA testing criteria. These are the core things that we produce. Testing is an interesting word, and in the mobile world, everybody uses testing in a different way. So one of the things that we're working on, and it's taking a little while to put together because it's quite a complex piece of work, is a testing glossary, which actually describes a common vocabulary that we can use to talk about testing, to define what the different what we mean by the different types of testing, how we would differentiate functional testing, non-functional testing, compatibility testing, interoperability testing, system testing, unit testing, A/B testing. The list goes on and on. What we have produced with our testing criteria really sit essentially in the system development lifecycle at the point of a user acceptance testing criteria. So if you think of them as user acceptance tests, that's probably the right place to think of them in the life cycle. So once your app is pretty much finished, but before you put it out for public consumption, before you've put it out there and your users find any errors. We have now 3 testing criteria that we produce. Our original testing criteria, which we're now calling our baseline testing criteria, which fundamentally go through and make sure that the app works well on the device. We then have some network performance testing criteria. Now these work in association with the AT&T Arrow tool, the Application Resource Optimizer. If you haven't looked at that tool and you're anyway involved in developing apps, it's something that is really very useful. It does a deep dive into how the app uses data on the phone and on the network, and it enables you to determine how efficient your app is in terms of using that data. I remember when AT&T first showed it to us, they gave us an example of a music download app that was eating up the battery on the device. Now, you would imagine that it would do because you're downloading music, but what they found was it wasn't the downloading of music that was causing the battery or using up all the data. It was actually a badly timed keep alive signal. Now, why might that cause the battery to run down? Well, on a 3G device, the battery has a sleep cycle, and it goes from being very active to being moderately active to being asleep and in power saving mode. It so happened that the timing of this keep alive signal on the music download app was causing the radio to always be hard on, always be in this hot, high active mode, thus never allowing the radio to go into its sleep mode. And that was what was causing the battery drain. The developer fixed that, changed their strategy for keep alive, and all of a sudden the app started working an awful lot better and the battery performance improved significantly. So that's the network performance testing criteria. And the thing we're going to talk about today is the accessibility testing criteria. But all of this is about how the app works on the device. It's about testing the app on a device with a real user on a real device in the real world. So why do we need to do this? Well, the testing criteria have been put together with the experience of major players across the world over a number of years. And the input has come from people like AT&T, Motorola, Microsoft, was Nokia, Orange, Vodafone, Samsung, LG, Sony, and a range of other people who have been members over the years. They focus on the aspects that developers miss. Why do developers miss these things? Well, your average developer will focus on what his app needs to do. Will focus that it gets the weather correctly for where you are, that it predicts the heat wave here in London tremendously well. And it'll focus on whether it gets the stock price correctly within a nanosecond of it being published or whatever it may be. But they always forget the things that happen on a real device, such as what happens when you get an incoming phone call. We looked at an Olympics app a couple of years ago when the Olympics were here in London, and it was great. The developer had done a fabulous job, streamed the Olympics beautifully. Picture quality was wonderful, sound quality was wonderful. Only trouble was they hadn't gone through the AQuA testing criteria, and when we tested it, we found that when you got an incoming phone call, the app correctly dropped into the background, but the sound carried on playing, which was slightly awkward when it actually turned up on both ends of the phone call. So it's that sort of thing that we test for in the AQuA testing criteria. These are always top 10, these are always the things that developers forget. They forget to check that the app works well on the device and forget to do the things that users really do. I was testing an app the other day, and very quickly in our multi-touch test found that you could trigger off several events at once, which clearly the app developer would never try to do. Users do it all the time. So it finds the complex environment that real users have in the field that you don't necessarily see on the device in the lab. And we know these are common. And we know they're common because over the years we've tallied up all the errors that we found in the different tests that we've done, and we've made a top 10. So this is all on the website. I won't talk through these in any level of detail, but you can see it's everything from being inconsistent in the user interface, icons, text that is not clear, inconsistency in the language, privacy policy. Now that's a big one. You've got to have a privacy policy within the app. And app crashing, remarkable. How many people still have apps that you can cause to crash? Help, and the big one, network connectivity. Does the app work properly? Does it do the right things when you lose connectivity? When your train goes into a tunnel? When you switch the phone into airplane mode? There was a very popular social networking app a few years ago that would virtually brick the phone when you switch the phone into airplane mode because it assumed it could continue to always talk to its host site. And disorientation on the screen. So a top 10 of errors, just some of the things that we use to highlight the fact that the AQuA testing criteria find a consistent set of errors that developers consistently miss because they're focused on the functionality, not on all of the things around the device. Okay, moving on. Traditionally, all of our testing criteria have been downloadable PDFs, so you can download a piece of paper and instantly create a checklist, a tick sheet, a way of going through the test, a way of making sure that it works, but using it on paper. A couple of years ago, somebody asked us to do exactly the same thing online, and we did that. So we now have the baseline testing criteria online as a testing criteria tool, and this allows you to simply run through the tests, tick off whether it's passed or whether it's failed, or whether in some cases it's got a warning, and put any comments in beside it, and then at the end of the day create a nice report that you can use to show that you've run through all the tests and everything is fine. This is online and it's hosted on our quality app directory, one of the many online tools that we have on that platform. We will be creating the testing criteria tool for the accessibility testing criteria soon. It isn't quite there yet, but it will be there within a few weeks. And talking about the quality app directory, this is a place that we have created where developers can put their apps, any apps that they're particularly proud of that show that they have done their testing. And if they pass the AQuA baseline testing criteria, you can upload all those details into the quality app directory. Very first level of that is a self-verification where you simply upload it as a developer and say, yes, I've done all the tests, and you put it up there with a self-verified level. And the highest level of quality is when a third party, a trusted test house, has gone through the AQuA test for you, and at that point we can give you the seal of approval, the AQuA verified app endorsement that you can see here on the screen. Okay, so now we come into the part where we have technical challenges. I've finished talking about AQuA, and we'll start talking about the Mobile Manufacturers Forum, and hopefully we can unmute Sabine. Sabine, are you there?
Yes, hello everyone.
Hello Sabine. Now you're in Austria today, is that right?
Yes, I'm in Vienna.
So Sabine, I introduced you as the Communications and Regulatory Officer for the Mobile Manufacturers Forum. Can you tell us how you managed to meet AQuA and how we started on this project?
Yes, sure. So as you mentioned, the Mobile Manufacturers Forum is the association of the equipment manufacturers and includes, it has as its members all the major mobile phone brands. And these mobile phone brands, the mobile manufacturers, already in 2010 decided to put their resources together to promote mobile accessibility. And in this context, today we visit and we attend lots of international meetings and conferences. And for example, last year I went to the Apps World London just to see what is happening in terms of accessibility apps. And at this event, we listened to a very interesting panel discussion on how app developers can increase their user base, can reach more people, can promote their app better. And it was very interesting discussions about server stability and about all sorts of things that app developers should consider. However, we were quite astonished to not hear accessibility mentioned, not even once. And so after the panel discussion that was chaired by you, Martin, we just went up to you and just asked if the App Quality Alliance had ever considered putting accessibility on the agenda. And the motivation for this question was that we are in contact with a lot of organizations of persons with disabilities, and the accessibility of apps is something that comes up always. They always ask us what they could do to get app developers to make their apps more accessible, what they could do to raise awareness, and in general to move the market in that direction.
That's really good, and it was very very well timely actually that you came and talked to us, because at that show you weren't the only person who actually came to talk to us about accessibility of mainstream apps, and there were an astonishing number of inquiries when we were standing at our booth at that show. So it was clearly time for the industry to think about it, and that was really good. But coming back to the MMF, I talked about a couple of the members, but what does MMF do and who are the members?
Okay, so as mentioned, our members telecommunications equipment manufacturers, and so we do have the major brands like Apple, Samsung, Sony, LG, Alcatel, OneTouch, all the big, Microsoft of course, the former Nokia, Motorola, so the big brands in the handset market. And in terms of accessibility, already as early as 2010, the manufacturers themselves had really strong demand from the users to provide better information on accessibility features. And here we are talking about really information about already existing technical solutions. So in today's handsets, we have lots of good accessibility features on the hardware side, as well as on the software side. And it's basically only in this third dimension of third-party applications that we really also need to catch up to get the whole ecosystem of the mobile device accessible. And so to help in this respect, our members decided to put all their information on accessibility features in a free online database. And that is the Global Accessibility Reporting Initiative, which is an awful long name, but in short it is GARI. And the GARI database is online available, freely accessible for everyone, and it lists information on the accessibility features of over 1,000 mobile phone models around the world in 15 languages.
So why should developers care about making their apps accessible? What's in it for them? Why do they care?
Well, going back to that discussion that we heard at the Apps World London, I think for app developers, it's their motivation to get more users and to get more people to use their app. And if you look at the figures of persons, the statistics about persons with disabilities, or put differently about the number of people that have accessibility needs, be it because they have an injury or a disability or because they're just aging. It's very impressive because the World Health Organization estimates that 1 billion people is affected by some sort of disability. And here we do not talk about not only about people sitting in a wheelchair, we talk about people with low vision, with hearing impairments, with cognitive limitations, people that cannot move their hands, and still they all need to be able to use their mobile phone and use the applications on it. So there is a huge market. And we have also come to the point where we do have an economic argument. So there are reports like by Chris Lewis from Lewis Insight, just published in the beginning of this year, who talks about, let me just look up the figure, he talks about $3.5 trillion worldwide, of course, of the annual budget available to persons with disabilities. That's their market power. And of course, they will not spend all of that on assistive technologies. But the thing today is that we do have persons with disabilities that look for solutions and they cannot find them. And especially in the apps world, there are lots of opportunities.
I see, and I think you said earlier that the GARI database is something where they can where you can help them to find apps. Do you have a list of apps on the GARI database as well as the handset capabilities?
Yes, we have a section for accessibility-related apps, and here on the GARI we really talk about apps that have been designed for people to overcome a barrier. So you can either call them assistive apps or accessibility-related apps. But they have been specifically designed to help people. But then on the other hand, we do talk about accessibility in all mainstream apps, which just plainly allows a person with a disability, like a blind person who uses a screen reader, to use every app that's out there on the App Store. And that is one of the major pain points for persons with disabilities. They download apps from the App Store and they can never tell beforehand if the app will be accessible or not, because you cannot see in the App Store if the app is usable with a screen reader, for example.
So this is why we came together then to put together the accessibility testing criteria. And ongoing, MMF and AQuA are collaborating, and we have produced so far the accessibility testing criteria. What is really important to us is having extra feedback, so we're keen to know what you think as well. We've had some feedback already from AQuA members, which is wonderful, and MMF have helped us by putting the accessibility testing criteria draft out to some of their disability groups that they work with. But we're very keen to have everybody's feedback on this. So let's move on and let's introduce Greg. So as I said earlier, Greg works with me at AQuA. Greg is our Chief Quality Auditor and has had a strong hand in putting together the accessibility testing criteria. So without further ado, we'll have a look quickly at what we're going to talk about now. So we're going to talk about the accessibility testing criteria and how to use them, an overview of the structure of them, why we put them together as we have, and a couple of examples of the specific tests. As I said earlier, if you want more details on this, it is all on the AQuA website and you can find it from there. So, how to use the accessibility testing criteria. The point at which to use them is once your app is nearly ready to go. Now, we recognize that is too late in the process. We have started with accessibility testing criteria. We will now continue, and with MMF and with others, we are starting to work on a set of best practice guidelines for designing your app to be accessible to all, in the same way as we have the other best practice guidelines. But for now, we have the testing criteria. So before you do anything else, first of all, run through the baseline testing criteria from AQuA. This will tell you that your app basically works and you have caught the common errors. Remember the top 10 that we looked at earlier. Once we've done that, we then can run your app through the AQuA accessibility testing criteria. And just as a classic demonstration, you can never proofread your own slides, you can never proofread your own documents, you can't test your own app either. So instead of leaving your spelling mistakes in the slides as I have done, you can get your app tested hopefully by a third party. Now the purpose of this is to remember that you need to focus on your target audience and the nature of that app. Now, why do I say that? Well, when we're talking about accessibility, not all issues with accessibility are the same. And in order to cope with that, we've looked through Gary and we've looked through the W3C recommendations, and we've come up with different categories of tests. So we've broken it down into, I think, 6 separate categories. Usage for people with limited vision includes usage without vision. And a subsection of that being the usage for people without perception of colour, and indeed also minimizing the aspect for photosensitive seizure triggers. We then move on. The next section talks about usage with limited hearing, and then without vocal capability, usage with limited manipulation or strength, in other words, finger use on the device, and finally, usage with limited cognition. Now clearly, coming back to the nature of the app and the type of the audience that you're looking at, if your app is purely visual, perhaps you have an app that's dealing with the minute detail of fine art, it's going to be extremely difficult to make that very worthwhile for somebody with limited vision. Or if your app is extremely sound-based, again, it's going to be difficult to make that usable for somebody with very limited hearing. However, you look at the audience and look at the categories that you wish to ensure that your app is accessible for, and you can go through those tests within that category to ensure that your app is fitting in that area. So within each category, we've also broken down the tests into a series of functional areas. And those functional areas are navigation, how you can move around the app, control, execution of any particular aspects of the app. A really important one is feedback. How do you give the user feedback that an action has started, or that the app is doing something? Issues about the display and how that is laid out, perhaps. Any adjustments and settings that you can do. For example, setting your app to a high resolution, high contrast display is very helpful for those with limited vision. Or indeed whether your app works correctly with some of the external devices that you can use to connect to your app, such as external keyboards or switches or controls of many different natures. So let's have a look at a couple of these specific tests as we come into the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes of the webinar. And let's just go through a couple of these ones. So this, you can see, is part of the section, the category for users with limited vision. And this particular test is looking for audio prompts of all of the content. Now, the first set of accessibility testing criteria we've done are just for the Android platform. Why have we gone platform specific? Well, that's because there are different things built into each of the platforms to actually help people with accessibility, and we wanted to make sure that we were entirely relevant with that. This one has something interesting in it. We start talking about TalkBack. Greg, can you tell us a little bit about TalkBack? Is that something that you need to add to your device, or is it installed on all of the Android devices?
It depends on the age of the device and the version of Android installed on it. As a generalization, most devices with Android from 4.0 onwards will have TalkBack installed. Earlier devices, you'll need to go to the Play Store and download it as a separate component and install it.
And TalkBack does what it says. It tells you, gives you a voice feedback for what's going on the screen. I take it. I think we had some feedback about TalkBack, didn't we, when we sent the document out for review?
We'd mentioned it, but as somebody pointed out, as it's not always available on the device, we really need to include some advice in our publication on where to find it, how to install it, and pointers to any tutorial or information that's available about using it. And as it happens, there is a lot of useful information online that Google has published. So in the next version of the document, we will be adding all of that in.
Brilliant. And I know when I first started using it on my device, I installed it and I found I couldn't actually use the device. It took me a little while to learn how to use it again. It was quite strange. But we also talk here about a screen reader. Aren't they the same things? I mean, why do we talk about both a screen reader and TalkBack here?
Well, they're doing the same thing, but there are a number of third-party screen readers available for the Android platform, and their focus is different to TalkBack. TalkBack is Google's screen reader, which is intended to make the device as accessibility friendly as possible, and some third-party screen readers go a lot further in trying to enable specific functions that people may use in certain kinds of businesses, for example. So they will have a specialized focus, and it's necessary to distinguish between them and TalkBack, because TalkBack is the generic provision on the device, and screen readers may have a very different set of functionality. So we tend to suggest testing both using TalkBack and screen readers where they're relevant to the use of the application.
And we also talk here about using directional controls to move the focus. Do Android devices normally show the focus?
Not as such. It's something we tend to take for granted with the touch interface. When we touch a control, we are shifting the focus to it. We may also be causing the control to be actioned at the same time, but that concept of focus still exists in exactly the same way that it does with a PC, where you could be using a mouse or even keyboard controls. It becomes important once you use a screen reader, because a user with limited vision needs to know what the next control that is going to be actioned is, where the focus actually is, so that if they touch or they operate a switch or something similar, they know which control is going to be actioned. So screen readers will typically tend to tell the user which control currently has focus, which element on the screen is going to be actioned when they do something. And because of that, it becomes important when you're trying to provide accessibility.
So this is the first example we're going to have a look at. It's just one more test we want to have a look at, and then we'll stop and answer some questions, because I think a bunch of questions have been coming in. So that's good, and that it's interesting to see the things that you have to think about that you wouldn't otherwise need to consider when you're testing your app for accessibility. So let's check the next one out. So this is looking at a test from the section for usage with limited manipulation or strength. So just while we're looking at that, limited manipulation or strength, we're using a lot of different terms here. I mean, where did we get these terms from? How do we know these are the right terms to be using?
Well, this is another thing where we're very grateful for the first cycle of feedback that we had. One of our members pointed out that there was a document from the industry organization ETSI that provides a very exhaustive set of descriptions and terminology for use in all IT procurement, and that this is generally used by most specialist organizations, the terminology in that document. So we went, downloaded it, looked at how we've been describing things and rewrote all of our terminology to be in line with that document, because we want to be using what is generally regarded as the standard way of describing things.
Which is good, and I don't think that was the only source we used for help. So we based a lot of the information on Gary, I know, which gave us a lot of the structure that we're using. We used the
Yes.
W3C and as well.
WCAG. I can't remember what it stands for, but I know it's vital.
All the links are in the document themselves, aren't they?
Exactly.
And of course, all the best practice from Google as well. So we've combined all that together into these testing criteria. There's just one final thing I want to talk about. This is talking about the needs of users with tremor or muscle control limitations. What sort of things can happen? What can go wrong with an app for somebody with a tremor?
Well, one of the common examples you might find is where you've got a control that switches between two different modes when it's tapped, for example, play or pause in a music application. If you have tremor, it is very difficult to make a distinction between single touch and double touch. So you might find yourself very frustrated because you cannot get a control into the state you want, because you cannot precisely apply the correct amount of touch that the application recognizes. So to be suitable for a user with something like tremor, the application shouldn't use that kind of toggling operation, but should offer different ways of use that allow for a user that can't easily control touch to distinguish between single and multiple taps, for example.
Right, and I think that's key to some of the things that we've done throughout the document. We're not trying to offer solutions. We're not telling developers how to write the apps. We're not telling them how to use the features within the devices, but we are making sure that we ask the questions of the apps and making sure that we set up the conditions that people can run through to check whether their apps have made any assumptions about the abilities of people to use touchscreens or anything else along the way. Thank you, Greg. That was useful. I think given that our time is coming up, I think we'll move on from this one and see if we have one more slide before we go to questions. For all of you listening, what can you do next? Well, everything we've talked about today you can find on the website at qualityalliance.org, and details of there you'll find you can find how to join AQuA and take part in the conversation that we're having, how to use all the free resources that we have there, be they papers, test criteria, best practice guides, everything else we've talked about. Obviously, if you're an app developer, you can test your app against the testing criteria. Once you've done the baseline testing criteria, you can upload them to the quality app directory. Or if you've gone through the accessibility testing criteria, then you can submit them to the Gary directory as well. And the links are here. Now, we will have these links again on the website, so you can find them at a later date. That's fine. And we always want your feedback. So at the end of this session, there'll be a short questionnaire. And if you could fill that in for us, we would be most grateful. We are a not-for-profit organisation trying to do things to help the industry, and we take feedback very seriously, and we want to do the things that the industry needs to move forward, which is why we're so pleased to work with Sabine on this particular project, which hasn't stopped here, because we will carry on, obviously, to provide accessibility testing criteria for the other platforms. So time is pushing on, so let's move on into any questions. Question here, where can we find out more about the MMF? Sabine, is there something you can tell us? What's the website address for the MMF?
So for the MMF, it's mmfi.info. And for Gary, as such, it's just gary.info, so GARI.info.
So both accessible easily on the website, and there's a lot of information there about that. Question about what reaction or feedback have we had so far. Sabine, what sort of reaction have the disability groups that you've shown the accessibility testing criteria to given you?
So the reaction was overall very positive. They're very happy that people that have access to app developers are starting to talk about accessibility, and that the information is pushed towards app developers. because what we also notice is that no one forgets accessibility on purpose. It's just that the awareness is not there yet. So they're very happy about this kind of work, and they're very much looking forward to just seeing more accessible apps in the future.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. And what is the final one we've got here is, what is the next platform that we're going to put out for accessibility testing criteria? And I think we're working on the Microsoft platform, and if we can get that to a state where we're ready to go with that, that will be the one that we're going to hope to put out next. Obviously, we'll try to get the Apple one out as well. As it turns out, the Microsoft platform is much more similar in accessibility terms to Android. Apple have got a range of different things within the iPhone platform, but we will be doing that as soon as we possibly can. And any feedback you have for us, anything in terms of input that we can use to speed that along, would be wonderful. Oh, there's one more question here. Some of the test cases don't give precise examples. That's good. Somebody's downloaded and read the accessibility criteria already. How should we apply them? Well, all the applications are different, and so we try to give test cases that you can adapt to your application. So really what we're doing is trying to provide the right questions for you to ask of your application, and to test the assumptions that you might have made in your design. So we won't give sort of precise application-specific test criteria, but we do give the platform-specific ones that you can use and adapt to your app. I think we can wrap it up and say thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. Thank you to those of you who have come along from all around the world. I'd like to thank Sabine very much for being with us. It's been great working with the MMF. It's been very useful, and hopefully we'll carry on and get many more fruitful cooperation together. And I'd like to thank Greg. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for listening, and any more information, come to the AQuA website or contact us directly. And thank you, Steph, for helping put all this together. Thank you very much, everybody, and that's about it. Thanks. Bye-bye.